So welcome to the second imposition-related talk today, because the JavaScript tips and tricks already had something of the stuff I'm showing now. So for all the people that heard the talk before, something will sound familiar, but I will go into more details on this talk. So the talk is divided into two parts. I'm here for telling you something about theory, and David is for practice. Okay, so I will start with giving you some information about sheets, slots, and run lists, all the terminology, and especially in the context of making sheet configuration and slot generation dynamic, using using dynamic run lists that create things on the fly. And David will show a practical example about books, something.
Yes, about books, and then something in a Switch app someone made that uses that technology.
Yeah. Okay. So I will start. Sheet configurations, it's just a short outline about my part of the talk. I will talk about sheet configurations, sheet size, definition, slots, what are slots, how are they defined, what are run lists for, how you can create dynamic sheets and run lists, and how you can parameterize all this stuff and put it together in something that actually works. And then we will have some demos. So that's just a screenshot from pdfToolbox after imposing a document, but this screenshot can be used to explain what a sheet actually is. So a sheet is just the white area in this screenshot. So that's the real estate where we can place pages on too. And on this page, we have slots. In this case, we have 6 slots. And each slot is defined by its offset on the sheet and the size of the slots, so the width and the height, and some other parameters that I will explain. Okay, so we get width and height of the imposed page. That's the main aspect of a sheet configuration. Slots are areas on that page where pages or text can be placed into. Then we can also have some static background in the sheet configuration as well. So, but that is not used in this talk at all. So I just wanted to mention it. So, what is a slot used for? As I already said, it defines the location of a placed page on the sheet, but it also defines some more aspects of the placed page. So we can rotate the placed pages, for example. So we can take the page and rotate it by 90-degree steps before placing. We can also define a scaling factor for the placed page, and we can also define some clipping area around the slot where the placed page is clipped afterwards. So we can place the trim box, for example, the trim box of the document or page that we want to impose onto the slot, and then the area that is on outside of the trim box will end up on the sheet as well, but we can clip it away. Okay? And we can also add cut marks. So put all together into this little picture here. Just shows all the parameters we have for a slot. So the solid line just outlines the rectangle of the slot, and the dotted, the dashed line defines the outer rectangle where the placed page is clipped after positioning page on the slot. And then we have some characters here defining the different anchor points in that slot. So we have the left bottom, center bottom, right bottom, right center, right top, center top, left top, and center points. So that different anchor points where we can just snap the page onto during positioning of that document. For referencing these slots in the run lists that actually define how the document gets imposed, we have some ideas. We have a slot ID, identifying the slots. We can have multiple slots on the sheet, obviously. So we have to assign a slot to a sheet page. So we can also have multiple sheets having different sizes. And each slot has to be on one sheet size. Okay, so we have also all the other parameters. We have a width, we have a height, we have this bleed, we call it bleed, but it's actually the clipping, defines the clipping of the placed page. We have a scaling, so if we place a page into the slot, there are different options. For example, the page size could be exactly the same size as the slot, so there's no problem. But if the page is larger or smaller, we have to make some decisions how to place this page into the slot. So we have to probably scale or even fit the page into the slot. So it depends on the goal that we want to achieve. So that can be set up by the scaling factor. So scaling in percent, if you specify a number, or -1 is just fit the page into the slot, and if you specify -1 for both directions, it will be fit into the slot without altering the ratio. So it will preserve the aspect ratio. So we can also define a rotation for that imported imposed page in 90-degree steps. And then we can define the placement of that page. So we can say, okay, the lower left corner of the imposed page should snap onto the lower left corner of the slot. So normally, in most cases, actually I don't know what are the most common cases, so I don't comment on that. So if I write some sheet configuration in the run list, I normally use center and fit into slot, but I think it depends on the application, that configuration. Okay. So questions to slots so far? No.
Okay, now it makes sense.
Okay, so we can write all this up into sheet configuration files, and these are normal old-fashioned static sheet configurations. So we give it a name, we give it a sheet size, so that's DIN A4, and we define some slots. So we have all these parameters, it's all the same parameters I just explained. So we have a slot ID, a sheet ID, we have a size, and we have these clipping, bleed parameters. We have the scaling, so in this case we have 100% scaling, and we have the placement and crop marks. In this case we have no crop marks. So that's actually one of the configurations that are included in the pdfToolbox imposition libraries. Okay, and then we have run lists at the other part. The run lists define how the pages are used from the PDF document that is to be imposed and how they should be placed on the slots on the sheet. So there are some commands that can be used in the run list. We have a pretty good documentation online, so if you want to look up the details, go to the help.callas.com site and search for run list, and you will find the documentation. The most important commands in this context are the new sheet command that will just add a new sheet to the resulting document, and the position page command that will take a page from the document and put it into a slot according to the definition of that slot. And then there's also another command that adds some text to the sheet. So that's working the same way. It's just referencing a slot ID, and you can specify a text, and we'll just put the text into that slot according to the placement options in the slot. Okay. And that's how a typical run list looks like. That's all, again, a run list from the pdfToolbox standard installation. It's will place 8 business cards eight times on a sheet. So what does it do? It creates a new sheet, and then it places a text. So that's a date, timestamp, and some information, and then it just positions the same page, different pages in different slots. So different pages because it increments the page counter after each step. Okay, so that's very static, so it can be set up, but you have to write this sheet configurations and run lists, and they are not so they're somehow static, so you can't move slots around inside the run list, for example. So and that's the topic of this talk, actually, to show you how you can make this all of this more dynamically. Starting with the sheets, we can also we can not only define the sheets statically, so if you want, for example, if you want to create a sheet that is growing according to the pages you impose, so we have probably what David showed with his proof page. If you want to make a proof page that has 100% preview of the first page, you have to increase the sheet size for each different document that you want to process. So that can't be done with a static sheet configuration, because the sheet configuration is static. So what we need in this case is a mechanism to dynamically parameterize all the geometric parameters of a sheet, so the width and the height, essentially, the size of a media box. And there's also another option to define the trim box for the sheet page. So that's in a nice addition. So you can create sheet pages that have a trim box. How does it work? It works by using one special command in the run list. That's the set command. With the set command, you can assign a value, so a value from the right side, to the variable with a name. So in this case, we set, that's a placeholder for an actual number, set to the sheet dev trimbox age variable, and this variable has a very special meaning. All these variables that here are on this slide have a special meaning in the way that these variables are used if you call another special function in the run list, and that is the set sheet command that will just pick up all the values from these variables and create a sheet configuration dynamically. And then you can just use the normal new sheet command to actually create the sheet in the resulting document. So I think, is that clear? So the same mechanism can be used for slots. So it's actually the same thing. It's just different names for the variables. So we have slot def variables, a lot of. So for all the aspects of a slot. So that's essentially the trim box of the slot. We have the bleed offsets for creating the clipping rectangle of the slot. We have variables for the scaling factor, as explained earlier. And then we have a variable for rotation. I just spelled all the variables out here so that you can take that as a reference. So if you get the slides, I think the meaning is clear, so don't have to explain it again. Cut marks as well. Okay, we have some, in the lower part of the slide, we have the three special functions in the run list that deal with dynamic slots. Probably I explain this one first. The make slot function just creates a dynamic slot for a sheet ID and a slot ID, and it picks up all the values from the slot def variables and creates just a slot. So what happens with the slot that's already there in the sheet configuration? It is shadowed. So if you use that slot ID, it will use the slot that was set dynamically with this command, if you have a slot with the same ID in the sheet configuration already. So that's the reason why we need also the delete slot function to remove this dynamic slot from the sheet configuration again. So if we, for example, want to use the original slot we have in the sheet config. And then there's also another function that's called capture slot that can be used to populate all these slot def variables with values from the sheet configuration. So we can set up sheet configuration defining some slots on the sheet by measuring it and putting in all the values in the slot in the sheet configuration, and then you can capture that slot and move it around, for example. If you want to just have this slot with all the crop marks and rotation and scaling information, and you want just to move it to a different location, you can just call capture slot, then adjust some of the variables, but not all, and then call make slot, and then you have the modified slot configuration. Okay. If we want to do dynamic imposition, we want to parameterize the slot generation that I just explained. Probably we want to feed in some information from the outside. So while you could use dynamic slots for run lists that do not need information from the outside, it can be interesting to feed in some information from variables, for example. So you could create a process plan, for example, where you have some input fields, where you can specify the number of slots you want to have, and feed this information into the run list. And inside the run list, you pick up the information and create all the slots on the fly. So how does that work? For this purpose, there's a special run list command called, it's the same command I already explained. It's a set command. With the set command, we can set a run list variable. So that's a variable with a name that we give it to a value, and this value can be evaluated by the environment token, how we call it. So the environment token picks up information from the outside, and outside means in this case, for example, in this impose implementation toolbox, we have three sources of information that can be used by the environment token. That's the run list name, the sheet configuration name, and all the variables that live in the app var's JavaScript object. So it's dynamic by itself, the list of possible values. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you put it all together, it looks something like that. So if we want to use variables, we have to use process plans. Or we can use the impose action also on the command line without variables. Because values that you specify by the set variable command line option will also end up in the environment top. But if you want to use it in desktop, you have to use a process plan. So in the first step, you would define the variables, and in the second step, you will just run the run list that uses these variables and creates slots on the fly. And because I'm nearly out of time, I think I will hand it over to you.
I will show exactly what you said.
Oh, that's good.
I was going to show this as a new technique, but Ulrich has already given it away, which is good. I'm actually going to show an implementation. This is a real question that we got, and where we implemented a solution for a partner. This is someone who gets covers from books. So the input file is a PDF that has 4 pages. And what they want as output is what you would expect when you have a book cover. They want to have a PDF file that contains 2 pages, but each page now has 2 of the original pages on it. So you have the outside of the cover, and the second page is basically the inside of the cover. The problem you have with that, this is easy. I mean, if you're writing an imposition config for that, is anyone could do that. Well, the problem is that each book has a different thickness. If you think about a book, some are thicker than others, which means that that sign area that you have there, the area in between the 2 parts of the cover or the inside cover, is actually different. If it's a very small book, they will be very close together. If the book grows thicker, it will be further apart. So if you want to be able to do this, if you want to be able to prepare these files, you need to know what the thickness needs to be of that piece in between, and you want to move these 2 pages more closely together or more to the side. And that you can do with this dynamic imposition. So let me see if I can bring that up. I think I closed my project file during the last session. I hope I still have it somewhere in recent stuff. There we go. So what I did for that is there is a sheet config. Now in their particular workflow, the incoming pages always have the same size, so that's not the problem. So if we look at this, the orange rectangles always have the same size. That could also be a variable if you wanted to, but in their workflow it's not. It's always the same size. So what I've done is I have defined 2 slots for this in my sheet config. And you can see that the input size is A4. That's the width and the height of an A4 page. They have some bleeds. And these 2 slots are positioned somewhere. I have to put them somewhere. So they are positioned somewhere on the bigger sheet. But of course I don't know whether that positioning is correct, because it depends on the thickness of the spine in between. When you look at the run lists, there is some stuff going on here. And you could actually choose the process plan approach and probably do the calculations in JavaScript in the process plan, which would be entirely more fun than trying to do it here. But
Would I try to?
yeah. So I did them in the run list here. So the first line says what Ulrich just said using this set keyword. So it looks at the environment, looks for a variable called book thickness. If it doesn't find it, it says that the default value is 10, and that it assigns that to something called the book thickness in the run list. So from that point on, in my run list, I have something that is called the book thickness, and it is assigned whatever comes in from the outside as the thickness of the spine of this book. And then, as I said, the slots themselves have the correct width and height. That's not the problem, but it's the positioning on the sheet that can differ. So it's the x coordinates of each slot that I have to calculate. And these two sets, slot 1 left and slot 2 left lines, do the calculations that are necessary to figure out where those two slots need to be on the imposed sheet, taking into account what the thickness of the book is. And I took some shortcuts here because I also know what the size of the final sheet is. That's always the same and so on. So normally it would require a little bit more calculation, but here I can cut some corners. And this is the cool stuff. So I had two possible approaches now. If you think about what Ulrich showed, I could have no slot definitions in the sheet config. Can you actually have that without? Yes. Okay. So I could have an empty sheet config and then use create slot, I think, to create something completely on the fly. But I chose not to do that because everything about this slot I can set statically except for the exposition. So what I have is I have these two slots. I use capture slot, which looks at the slot with ID 1, loads all of the characteristics of that slot in these variables that Ulrich showed, and this is one of them. So capture slot loads all of that into the variables. Set slot def trim box L sets the left-hand side of the trim box. So I change that variable, and then I say make slot. So I load what is there, modify the ones that I want to modify, and then set everything back into the slot that is already there. Same for the other one. We have 2 pages on this. So capture, change the left-hand side of that slot, and then set it back. And there probably isn't too much more to it. I have the outside of the cover and the inside of the cover. So I end up having 2 new sheets, positioning the pages in the correct spot, and then I end whatever is going on there. Now, let me. Oh, I don't even have pdfToolbox anymore. Okay. I have a file that is not about penguins. Wait for it. This is a. I'm sorry. This is a 4-page file as the one that comes in. So outside of the cover, inside of the cover. And now if I go to switchboard imposition, this is the run list file, and then I have the sheet configuration. If I run that, this is what I get. So I get the outside of the cover and the inside of the cover. Now, the problem that you then have, of course, is exactly what Ulrich said. I have a variable in there, but there is no way to feed this variable into my imposition config. When I have a sheet config or a run list with variables, pdfToolbox doesn't show me this dialog box to set them, which would be nice. But just saying. But what you can do is you could either use the command line, or I can make a process plan. And in that process plan, I think I do exactly what you said. There is a first step that defines the variable that I want to use, and then the second step is this variable imposition configuration. So that variable that the user selects is passed on to the imposition config, and that means that if I run this now, not on this, hold it. That almost went wrong. When I run this now it asks me what is the spacing in between. The default is 10 millimeters. That's what we just saw. If I now say I want 2 millimeters in between, it's a very thin book, then I can save the result and I get something that is very close together. The reason that they're centered is because that's what they wanted, so there has to be a certain amount of space in between the two pages of the cover, but the cover as a whole always has to be centered in the sheet. That's why you saw the calculations in the beginning. So the white space on left and right hand side has to be the same. And just to prove that I'm not, I could have still faked this, I think. Anyway, if I do 20, and pieces might actually start going off the sheet, I don't know. I think it's just gonna work. Yeah, so when I do 20, I get 20 millimeters in between. So again, there are two approaches. You could say I'm going to define the slots completely dynamically, just because I can. The downside of that is that instead of having a relatively short run list with only one variable that I need to change, I probably need to set how many, 12, 15, 16 different variables, and then use this make slot.
There are also default values.
Yeah.
If you do not want to use capture, so
Yeah.
I think you get rotation 0. And,
Yeah, but still you have to set the height and the width and the. So I would have to set a long list of variables and then do this create slot or make slot. And in here I just use what already exists in the sheet config, and I modify only the part that I need to modify. Yeah. So it's a little bit easier from that point of view. Does that make sense? Any questions?
When I use the capture slots command, does it refer in the second case? Oh, let me rephrase it. If I start with a single slot definition within my sheet config, and if I use this 2 times the capture slot operator.
Yes.
It always captures the slot from the sheet configuration, from the static slot.
Yes.
So that's the question. It will not capture the variables that you have set
Yeah.
in between.
Okay. So it refers to the original
Yes.
definition.
Yes.
So you can capture a slot, set some values, and you don't have to delete it in order to recapture the original values.
So you could have one slot in the sheet config that you use as a template if you want, and that you capture over and over, modify what you want,
Yeah.
and you don't have to
even
use
change
slots.
IDs because you can
Yeah,
capture slot 1 and
Yeah.
change some values and let's say set slot with a different ID,
Yeah.
second slot.
Yeah.
In the sheet config, yes.
And you don't have to use slots, so if there is a default slot, you can just skip it once you do the actual imposition. Yeah. Okay. That gives me 5 more minutes, I think. And it's only lunch after this. So. So there is one other thing that I want to show, because it was shown to me and it uses this exact technology as well. So this is an example of someone, in this case Jan Soeg, who couldn't be here, but anyway, who used this dynamic impositioning technology to make this is an app on the Enfocus Switch App Store. And the idea about this was to allow you to activate. The idea was to take whatever input file comes in, up to a certain limit, and to automatically create enough slots for that file and place it on a sheet in a good way, I guess. See, selection is not always easy. It's not just you.
Okay.
I probably should not try to impose the original flow file. Although I'm not sure what happens if you do that. It sounds very recursive.
Whether we have an office conversion flow.
I don't think so. So the idea is that you take a whatever file comes in. So these are all files with. They're not made by me. There are no penguins. But they're all differently sized files, and what this app will do is it will look at the sheet size that you want, and as output it will generate imposed documents. So if I can get Switch to open this, so it looks at the sheet size, it looks at the size of the incoming file, and it calculates how to best place that incoming file a number of times on the sheets that you want. So it does a fill page basically. And then how it places it, in what orientation, and how many slots are created is determined by the run list. There are no calculations done in JavaScript. According to Jan, everything is calculated inside of the run list for this. And then, depending on what file comes in, if we choose something different here, we should see different results. So, relatively straightforward, but he wrote this for one of his customers who had a digital workflow and wanted a way to very quickly fill pages that need to be printed through that digital workflow. And I can't show you the underlying technology because it's an app and I can't open the app. But what he's using inside is exactly that system, except that he has an empty sheet config, and he calculates how many slots are required and then generates the slots and where the slots are completely on the fly in that case. And I think that ends it right on time, unless someone has
We still have 15 minutes.
more questions. Do we have 15 minutes?
Yeah, because lunch is only at 1,
Oh,
so...
well, we're done anyway.
Okay.
So you better have many questions now.
I'll make you a challenge. I was wondering about an old feature request, shingling. Shingling is still clipping the PDF instead of scaling.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's this -1 automatic scaling feature, but it doesn't work together with shingling, unfortunately.
You could
So I
use
was
dynamic
hoping that
slots.
At some point, you might come up with a shingling feature. I mean, a workaround would be I do the scaling up front in the PDF, so every PDF has a different size, and then I use that to create the position, but it should be actually easy for you just to.
Not for me, but for him.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I'm looking
Okay,
towards,
okay.
That's okay.
But
So
you said,
you could
yeah.
probably work around using dynamic slots.
But you probably don't want to.
Probably don't want to do this.
I don't want to do a shingling calculation on itself.
Yeah.
If you can avoid it.
And another thing there's always a workaround. the slot does not clip the PDF. So if the PDF is larger than the defined slot,
It does.
The slot plus the bleed offset clips the PDF, yes.
if I have a small slot, like let's say 1 by 1 centimeter,
Yeah.
and I place an A4 PDF in that slot,
Yes.
the
Yeah,
result is at A4.
Yeah. Yeah. That's correct because it's
The
using
slot
the
does
trim
not
box.
clip the PDF.
Yeah.
I always repeat the size of the trim box actually,
Yeah.
then the bleed is added.
Yeah.
So I always need to set the trim box in the pre-processing
Yeah.
step.
Mhm.
Sometimes it was just easier to make this dynamic slot calculation and then
Yeah.
use the slot to clip.
So that would be an option for the slot that you're
Correct, yeah.
asking for. To just do not do the calculation because that's actually it's complicated to blow up the slot to match the rotated and scaled trim box. There's going on much
Okay.
calculations actually. So
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
I could do that, I could do some kind of tiling at some point. At the moment, tiling.
okay, I see. Yeah.
Because if the slot would be used to clip actually the
Mm.
PDF, then I could do a kind of tiling using the imposition function.
Yeah, true.
We will take a note.
Okay. Gregor, you had a challenge? Hold on. You had a challenge?
I mean, you had a back of the book was blank.
Mhm.
Can you fill it? Extend the bleed or do something?
You can't fill the bleed with the imposition engine by itself, so you would have to pre-prepare something again in order to do that. So what you could do is add a white page, give it a color, and then use that in the imposition step. That would be possible.
So you would make a slot 1 centimeter wide by 297 plus 3 meters.
And that is
Yes.
exactly where I ran into that issue, where I wanted to use part of the cover as the spine.
Mhm.
But so I could find a small slot, but I had to duplicate the front of the PDF and find the trim box to then calculate the spine to place it there.
Yes.
Because the slot doesn't clip.
Yes.
In the slot. Yeah, but if the PDF page is A4, in the slot it has just a width of 1 centimeter.
Yeah.
The whole PDF A4 is placed, and then I have the bleed 3 millimeter outside of A4.
Yeah.
That's
So
the way it works.
The only workaround would be to use the, for example, the insert page to make a duplicate of the page. Yeah. And then set the correct trim box for the, which is what I would do in your case as well. You have this file coming in. What you can do is like you said, you have the two original slots that we already talked about. You define a slot in the middle for the spine, and then you insert a third page out of the document, or the last page of the document is a page that contains the color that you want to fill it with. That you can do.
Well, if you had a parameter force clip on slot or something like that, then you could actually.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Noted that. Could probably use negative bleed parameters for the slot to make clipping inside the slot, but that also has to be calculated, so it's not fun.
Yeah, the other thing that you could probably do if you want to fill the spine with a color is to modify one page, add the color to the right-hand side of that page, and make the first slot bigger so that it contains both the cover and the spine.
What about the option make bleed? That you would extend the bleed on each side for 1 centimeter and then they cover up.
Yeah.
Or meter the
Yeah, so the bleed option you now have simply provides more space, and then after which it clips. What you're saying is that if you set the bleed to 5 millimeters, you actually make bleed for 5 millimeters, right?
Yes, but you have an option in PDF that actually can create bleed.
Yes.
So first you would create bleed that you would extend, let's say, for, I don't know, 5 millimeters. And then you would make the left hand bleed of the right page and the right hand bleed
Yep.
of the left page larger. So they would meet at the middle.
Yep. You could do that, yes. You still have to do the calculation, and the calculation would be dependent on the book thickness again. But that's a variable. Make bleeds can take variables to determine how much bleed it makes, so there is no reason that should not work. It's an exercise for the student. You had still a question? No? You can ask questions, it's not a problem. Okay, if there are no more questions, then thank you very much. We're 10 minutes early for lunch, so you can still go outside and sit in the sun for 5 minutes or something.